I came across a comment on one of my videos where I mentioned that Bitcoin's returns are not going to diminish over time. I think that Bitcoin's returns are actually going to grow. That video is called Bitcoin's Returns Will Accelerate as Adoption Increases. These are the topics that I talked about in that video. The value of the US dollar is subjective. All fiat currencies fail in terms of gold. The US dollar can keep losing value forever. Gold sellers were left behind. So anybody who sold gold was left behind in the historical times where every currency that has failed against gold has pretty much disappeared. So let's say if you sold gold for the Weimar mark, you would have been left with nothing basically. The US dollar will eventually fail just like every other fiat currency to exist. Every other currency that has been deemed to be used as money will always fail because the people who deem it as money are going to eventually take advantage and they're going to print as much as they can. The next topic was legacy assets don't have diminishing returns. You can see the S&P 500 is actually growing and the returns are increasing because the S&P 500 has a limited number of companies. The shares of those companies are limited. They don't grow as fast as the US dollar because the US dollar literally has no supply limit. The S&P 500, real estate, all of these assets don't have diminishing returns. You can see that the returns are pretty consistent because the fiat currencies, the US dollar is pretty much being used to control the upside on these assets. The US government wants you to put your value into these assets because if you put that value into these assets, eventually you'll get taxed. And that's their incentive to continue to give you higher and higher returns. In general, legacy assets don't have diminishing returns. So why would you expect Bitcoin will? Over time, there are lower and lower US dollar international reserves. The US dollar is being held by fewer and fewer people for long term savings, and it will continue to be held by fewer and fewer people for long term savings. And I think that diminishing returns people are confused. I don't think they quite understand what we're going against here. We're going against a piece of paper, a currency that can be printed out of thin air. So Bitcoin is not going to have diminishing returns. The claim that I'm trying to make in this video is that the GDP numbers, the currency numbers, all of this information is fake. All of it is not real. So this comment that I came across was, I would love your thoughts on this criticism I ran across on Bitcoin 3 years ago. Total world currency is less than total GDP. So the remaining value is comprised of debt. Bitcoin is deflationary, so its value goes up with time. Therefore, no one would ever borrow Bitcoin because it would be more expensive to pay back the loan. So there would be no borrowing, no bond market, no reserve currency in Bitcoin. So it's a dead end. And I agree with most of this, but I don't agree with that last part. So it's a dead end. I think that Bitcoin is going to convince people to save. I think that people are going to save and they're going to have wealth, and we're going to see a lot less petty crime. I think we're going to see a lot more growth and compounding because of Bitcoin. And this is because the person at the bottom of the economy can now start contributing. The person at the very bottom, the minimum wage worker, if they can save in Bitcoin, they can eventually start spending money into the economy because the value that they save is going to go back into the economy and they're going to want to do something with it. They're going to want to enjoy their lives. They're going to want to eat better food. They're going to want to get a bigger house, whatever they want to do. They will eventually have the savings to do that. And they're going to be able to reward people for creating value. So the first perspective here is that because there's no debt, people will just save to buy whatever they want to. And I think that's going to be great because why wouldn't you want to have less stressed out people? Debt is a cause of stress. People feel stressed out because of debt. They want to be able to pay off their debt ASAP. They worry that maybe if they lose their job, they could go bankrupt. Debt is a way to keep people chained. It's a way to keep people working for as long as possible. It's a way to get you to keep going to your job so that you can keep paying income taxes. And over time, debt is used to increase the cost of everything. Over time, because more and more money is being added to the economy, more and more money is chasing the things that we want. So what you have is merchants who are constantly increasing prices. You have merchants that are constantly asking for more and more cash flow. They're constantly creating more and more subscription services. And the reason for that is that they can't save. They have to continue to extract value from their customers forever. They have to keep doing this. If they don't, then they go bankrupt. They can't operate without cash flow. So that first point there would be no borrowing. I think that's perfectly fine. We don't need to borrow. We don't need to have to borrow to buy the things that we need. Why do we need to borrow? Why do we need to borrow to buy houses? Why do we need to get a mortgage to buy a house? Why is it that we can't just save to buy a house? No borrowing would actually be a good thing. I think that that would be a positive because people won't be as stressed out. People won't be constantly thinking about how to make their next payment. People won't have to work jobs that they don't like. Maybe we'll have more creatives. Maybe we'll have better entertainment. Maybe more people will do things that they actually love doing. Maybe we'll have more people who are building their own brands. They have the time to create content and build digital real estate on YouTube or on Rumble or whatever platform you want to go on. The next comment here was the bond market. So there's no bond market. Of course, because if somebody wants to lend you their Bitcoin, then you're going to have a direct transaction with that person. You're going to directly borrow from them. You're going to directly borrow money from them. Why would they want to issue bonds that are backed by fiat when the world is on a Bitcoin standard? Bitcoin bonds are going to be completely different. The bond market on its own is completely fake. The market keeps growing and growing because more and more bonds can be created out of thin air. Why are we expecting that Bitcoin is a dead end because the bond market won't exist? The bond market is fake. It's worthless. It's nothing. The bond market exists to allow people who want to save to be able to earn a cash flow over time. So what they do is they lend cash to bond issuers who give them an interest rate. Now you can just hold Bitcoin. You don't need bonds. There's no need for bonds. Why would you want to lend to a massive company who's going to give you 3% when if you just hold Bitcoin, you could get 20, 25, 30%? Over time, those returns, as I explained in that previous video, I think those returns are going to increase. So what is the need for the bond market? Why would Bitcoin fail with no fake fiat currencies? Bitcoin would thrive. Bitcoin would do extremely well. The price of everything would fall over time. You'd be able to buy a house for 1,000,000 Satoshis. You'd be able to buy a house for probably less than that, maybe even 100,000 Satoshis at one point. At some point, it'll be 10,000 Satoshis. That number will keep falling because houses can be printed out of thin air. You can make more houses. You can create more value. Just like I can create this video, I'm creating this video with the information that's in my head. Somebody can build more houses. We can create more raw materials to build more houses. We can create more lumber. We can grow more trees. We can probably make synthetic lumber at some point. We can make more steel. We can do all of that and we can build more houses. But nobody can change the Bitcoin code to increase the supply. If you try to increase the supply, you have to convince all of the people who own Bitcoin to sabotage their own holdings, to sabotage their own wealth. How are you going to do that? How are you going to convince people that their asset should be diluted when they're the ones who enforce the rule to make sure that that asset won't be diluted? And I don't believe that there will be no reserve currency in Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the reserve currency. Bitcoin is money. Bitcoin is the best way to transfer value from one person to another. Bitcoin is the best way for nation states, for governments to have a savings account that doesn't have any counterparties. That's what they want. Even when you have something like gold, let's say, for example, there was a currency that was backed by gold. Whoever uses that currency has to trust somebody else in order to use that currency. They have to trust that there is something backing that currency, and then that entity that issues that currency has to hold on to that gold. How do you know that they actually have it? There's no digital record of how much gold they own. It's going to take the US something like 18 months to audit Fort Knox. Are you willing to wait a year and a half to get an answer on whether that currency that you're saving in is actually worth something? I don't think you'd want that. I think if you could, you'd want a digital reserve currency that can be used to save without other people being able to control the supply to make you their slave. Think about it. When we have fiat currencies, one group of people can print more money and they can pay another group of people to do whatever they want them to do. And you can basically hire as many people as you want to, and you can pay them in pieces of paper, and they're willing to do it because they've been brainwashed to believe that this piece of paper is worth something. Today, think about how many people are stuck in jobs that they hate. They're working a job simply because they have no other option. They have never thought of starting a business. They've never thought of creating something of value that they can sell to other people because they don't have the mindset that's required to create digital products or physical products or whatever, any kind of service that you want to sell to someone. They don't have the mindset to create those products. So, how are they going to sell them to somebody else? Today, most people have an employee mindset because employers give them a way to sustain their lifestyle without having to take risks. They can go to a job, they can do whatever tasks they're told to do, and they get paid in pieces of paper that merchants will accept. They will be able to pay their rent in US dollars. They'll be able to pay for food in US dollars. They never have to take a risk. Most people want this. This is exactly what most people prefer. And the only reason for that is that they've been brainwashed to believe that that's the right way to go. Most people have no idea that the world reserve currency is backed by nothing. I did a survey about 2 years ago on my Instagram to ask people what the US dollar is backed by. I gave multiple options. Most people voted that the US dollar is backed by precious metals because they have no idea what happened on August 15th, 1971. They have no idea that Richard Nixon canceled the direct international convertibility of the US dollar to gold. Before this, the US dollar was backed by gold. You could go and exchange your US dollars for gold if you wanted to, because each dollar was supposed to be backed by an equivalent amount of gold. But the US government pulled the rug on everyone. The US government made it so that you can no longer exchange your US dollars for gold, meaning that everybody got screwed over. Everybody who held these pieces of paper that we call US dollars are now stuck. They have no way to get the value that they were supposed to have back because the US government absorbed all of that gold. They created more pieces of paper than the amount of gold that they had in their safes. Most likely, this is all speculative because, again, we have no idea how much gold is in Fort Knox. There hasn't been an audit. So, my point here is that GDP, which is gross domestic product, is fake. And that's because the world currency is fake. This is the definition of GDP from Investopedia. Gross domestic product includes consumer spending, government spending, net exports, and total investments. It functions as a comprehensive scorecard of a country's economic health. GDP may be adjusted for inflation and population to provide deeper insights. Real GDP accounts for inflation while nominal GDP doesn't. So the problem here, again, is that we're using fake measures to create more fake measures. We're using inflation adjusted numbers to value the products that a company is creating, but you have to keep in mind that inflation can be manipulated. We have to trust somebody else to give us those numbers because we have no access to them. So let's think about that. If inflation is fake, how do you know that GDP isn't fake? How do you know that inflation is actually 2% as they say it is? How do you know that it wasn't historically 10% or 15%? And what they did was they just stole all of the technological gains that you were supposed to get. How do you know that the price of things shouldn't actually be falling if the amount of money in the system was stable? All of the assets that we have today are fake. All of the values of those assets are fake. We buy assets because there's nothing else that we can do. There's no way for us to save. So we just buy investments. We just buy rental properties. We just buy stocks. We buy index funds. The wealthy buy every investment that they can because they know that if they just hold on to dollars, they're holding on to a melting ice cube. And they know that the value of those dollars is going to trend to zero forever. So because there's a finite number of assets, the value of those assets keeps rising. The GDP will continue to literally rise forever. Inflation will continue to rise forever. You're going to see that eventually the US dollar is going to reach hyperinflation because people won't trust it anymore. Even if the US economy is doing very well, the currency that the US government is creating shouldn't be the world reserve currency. Why is it that one country's government can determine the economic future of every other country in the world? Why is that the case? Why is it that we need a world reserve currency that's controlled by one government? This is exactly what Bitcoin fixes. The US government can increase government spending, and by doing this, they can increase their own GDP. And because they can increase their own GDP, they can never lose if the world keeps using the US dollar. This number here shows you the US gross domestic product. And you can see here that the number keeps going up and it will keep going up literally forever. It'll never stop going up. And again, I keep showing you this graphic here. This number will also keep going up because the US government can keep running it up forever. There's no limit to how much debt the US government can take on in order to keep paying for the things that it wants to. The US government can manufacture its own GDP, which is a completely fake number. It can keep increasing its government spending. And this is exactly like playing Monopoly with somebody who can keep printing more and more money and paying themselves while you have to work for the money that you earn. You have to own properties while they don't have to do anything. You have to keep maintaining those properties while they can just print more money out of thin air. So let's go back to this comment here. I'm just going to go over it again. I would love your thoughts on this criticism I ran across on Bitcoin 3 years ago. Total world currency is less than total GDP. Again, the total world currency can keep increasing. They can keep printing more and more currency, and that currency can keep funneling into assets. Assets can keep growing forever because there's no limit to how much of the currency can exist. And GDP is also a fake number. You can keep increasing GDP as much as you want to. Government spending can keep increasing. The US government can keep borrowing more and more money. So GDP is fake. World currency is fake. So the remaining value, the value is fake, is comprised of debt. The debt is fake. Bitcoin is deflationary, so its value goes up with time. Therefore, no one would ever borrow Bitcoin because it would be more expensive to pay back the loan. Why should people who borrow money get to take advantage of a system where more money is printed and handed to them? That money is just being redistributed from the people who save in US dollars. Those people who save in US dollars are being taken advantage of. Their money is losing value, while the people who borrow money are able to pay back devalued loans at some point in the future at a rate that's lower than the real inflation. So, again, it would be more expensive to pay back the loan. And that's because the interest rates would be real, they wouldn't be fake. Today's interest rates are manufactured, they're created out of nothing. So the whole financial system is built on nothing. It's built on sand. It's a house of cards. And then the last part here, so there would be no borrowing, no bond market, and no reserve currency in Bitcoin. Bitcoin would be the reserve currency. There would be no bond market because people would just save in Bitcoin. There would be no need for a bond market. Maybe at some point in the future when Bitcoin is the world reserve currency and the interest rates on bonds are much, much higher, but there would be no borrowing for consumer purchases. I don't think that people will be borrowing to buy houses. I don't think people will be borrowing to buy cars. People will just save because Bitcoin is the reserve currency. Anyone who thinks that Bitcoin is a dead end because there would be no borrowing, no bond market, and no reserve currency, I don't think they quite understand where the future is going. I think that everything is going to be abundant because Bitcoin is scarce. There's only ever going to be 21 million. There will be entrepreneurs who are working to give you whatever you want to take your Bitcoin from you because they know that in the future, they will be able to buy whatever they want with the Bitcoin that you give them. So the value here is that Bitcoin's purchasing power keeps going up. It's an incentive for more and more people to buy Bitcoin. The value of fiat currencies, on the other hand, is that it helps governments to create fake numbers, to pad their numbers, to pad their stats, to make it so that they're seemingly more productive than they actually are. The US government will keep borrowing more and more money and it'll never pay it back and it'll keep increasing its GDP because it can. Why wouldn't it? If you had the choice to get free money in Monopoly to win the game and the game was literally life or death, then why wouldn't you take that free money? On a Bitcoin standard, this literally isn't possible anymore because nobody can print more Bitcoin. And that's why I think that Bitcoin is not a dead end. I think at some point, nobody will want to sell their Bitcoin. And that's because Bitcoin's returns are going to accelerate. And because the returns are going to accelerate, people are going to take on bigger and bigger fiat loans. And they're going to add more and more fiat to the system until the fiat system is basically worthless. At some point, one Bitcoin is going to be worth an unimaginable number of US dollars because nobody will want to give away their Bitcoin for dollars anymore. The dollar can be printed. As more people figure this out, the supply of Bitcoin runs dry, and nobody who wants to buy it, nobody who wants to get it, will be able to get it at the current price. Over time, the price has to go up in order to move Bitcoin, move supply from people who delayed gratification in the past to the people who want to delay gratification in the future. Bitcoin is the best means of doing this. So keep stacking Bitcoin. Don't get distracted. Keep buying as much as you can at whatever the price is because fiat currencies can be printed out of thin air. The price is literally going up forever.